listening deeply to Anjin Ketsujōshō. A resolutely settled mind. Anjin Ketsujōshō literally mean on the firm establishment of peace of mind, was called a gold mine by Master Renyo, 8th abbot of Shin Buddhism. It tells us vividly the meaning of true settlement of faith in Amida's primal vow, the significance of Nembutsu, and why people fail to endeavor in it. A truly marvelous teaching that all Pure Land aspirants should read. It is beautifully translated into English by Azo Tanaka, who has also provided excellent notes to the original text. However, these notes, which have been omitted in our reading here, can be read in his original translation, credited in the acknowledgement below. For the purpose of our video presentation, we have reorganized the tract into 6 parts, 1 to 6. Now, let us listen deeply as we read through this wonderful tract. Part 1. Anjin Ketsujōshō. A resolutely settled mind. Shin Buddhists should first of all understand how the original vow was made. Amida's great vow is made up of 48 constituent vows, of which the 18th is the most fundamental, the other 47 having been intended to reinforce our faith in the 18th. Shantao sets out this vow in the Ojo Rice-san as follows. If, when I have become a Buddha, sentient beings, throughout the 10 directions, who say my name, at least 10 times, are not born in the Pure Land, may I not enter that perfect enlightenment of Buddhahood. This means that, if every living being, throughout the 10 directions, is born in the Pure Land, having fulfilled the vow necessary for birth, and its attendant practices, Gangyo, he would become a Buddha, but, if any fail to be so born, then, he would not enter that perfect enlightenment. Here, the question may rise. If it is the case, that Amida's perfect enlightenment depends solely on whether we are born in the Pure Land, how is it that Amida has already entered perfect enlightenment, even though not every living being throughout the 10 directions has yet been so born? This I cannot understand. It is to be noted, however, that Amida has already accomplished our Pure Land birth by fulfilling, for each of us, our vow and its attendant practices. As the requirement of the vow and practices has been fulfilled, thereby securing Pure Land birth for every living being throughout the 10 directions, Amida has thus consummated the perfect enlightenment of the Namu, Amida, Butsu, in which those to be saved, Ki, and Amida, himself, Ho, are one. Therefore, there is no Pure Land birth of any ordinary living being, apart from Amida's perfect enlightenment. Amida entered perfect enlightenment when the Pure Land birth of every living being was accomplished, and thereby Amida's perfect enlightenment and our Pure Land birth were achieved simultaneously. This birth of every living being was accomplished at the hands of Amida, but as each one of us comes to realize it at different times, some attain birth in the Pure Land in the past, some are attaining it now, and some will attain it in the future. Although, within these 3 categories of time, each of us has to have his own moment for attaining birth, there is nothing for us to add to the absolute consummation Amida achieved on behalf of all living beings at the moment of his perfect enlightenment. It can be compared to the sun which, once having risen, dispels the darkness everywhere, and to the moon that rises in the sky and casts its image on the waters everywhere at the same moment. The moon casts its image on the waters whenever it rises, and also the sun, never fails to dispel the darkness when it rises. Therefore, just ask whether the sun has risen or not. We need not argue whether the darkness has cleared up or not. We might as well ask whether Amida has already attained enlightenment or not, instead of arguing whether ordinary beings will be born in the Pure Land or not. Amida, when he was the Bodhisattva Dharmakara, vowed that he would not enter Buddhahood unless all living beings attain Pure Land birth, and he has been a Buddha now for 10 kalpas. We have been vainly repeating the round of mortality without realizing that Amida has already brought it to an end for us by establishing our birth in the Pure Land. It says in the Hanju-san. Therefore, we should feel very ashamed about it, for Shakyamuni Buddha is indeed our loving parent. The two characters, Zan and Gi, are interpreted as to feel ashamed before heaven, and to feel ashamed before the world. They are also interpreted as to feel ashamed in oneself, and to feel ashamed in front of others. What ought we to feel so very ashamed about? We should feel ashamed at our stupidity in taking no notice of Amida, who, for an incalculable number of kalpas, labored for our sake to fulfill his vows and practices, and at our being deaf to Shakyamuni, who appeared in the world time and time again, even 8,000 times, from 500 dustmote kalpas ago, to let us know about Amida's wonderful vows. It may well be that, in following Mahayana and Hinayana paths and practices, we discover that, although excellent in their doctrine, they do not work for us, and we cannot keep on with them. The completion and fruition of other power vows and practices, however, have been achieved by Amida Buddha, and their merits turned over to us who lack goodness. Amida endows those merits even on those who abuse the Dharma, or who have no seeds of Buddhahood in them, or those who will be born during the 100-year period after the Dharma is in ruins. The Hanju-san tells us also that we should feel thoroughly ashamed of the fact that we have never attended to, or believed the Dharma that Shakyamuni Buddha spoke from his heart. There is no place in the entire Trikilyakasam, not one even small enough for a poppy seed to enter, in which Shakyamuni Buddha has not offered up his body and his life. In order that we, who do not trust in other power, might come to have true faith, the Buddha has performed all kinds of difficult and long-suffering practices to approach us and amass merits and virtues for us. Hence the Hanju-san says, we should be very ashamed that we pay no heed to this vast and magnanimous will of the Buddha. To make this point clear, the Hanju-san goes on to say, Shakyamuni uses various expedients to awaken this unsurpassed faith within us. Unsurpassed faith refers to the threefold faith of other power. Again, it says, there are many teachings providing a variety of expedients. This means that there are different scriptures for the benefit of different kinds of people. It is difficult for any ordinary person to come upon other power faith. Nevertheless, when we have experienced how hard self-power practices are, we come to see how easy are other power practices, and when we hear of the strenuous demands of the holy path, we begin to trust ourselves to the easy way of the Pure Land. Despite the fact that our Pure Land birth has already been accomplished by Amida, misled by wayward desires. We have for numberless ages repeated the round of mortality. And, thus, we have not, believingly accepted, the wonderful wisdom of Amida. The taking refuge in Amida of each living being, in the past, present, and future, in fact, means that each one turns to the here and now, once and for all consummation of Amida's perfect enlightenment. Shogaku no Ichinen. The thought of reciting the name and remembering Amida by each sentient being throughout the 10 directions partakes of that same perfect enlightenment of Amida. There is not a single living being's remembrance or recitation of Amida's name that stays with the practitioner. His name embodies the whole of enlightenment, because it is Amida's practice to fulfill the great vow, and it is not separate from Amida himself. Since his name is the embodiment of enlightenment, it constitutes the basis for birth in the Pure Land for every being throughout the 10 directions, and because it constitutes the basis for our birth in the Pure Land, there is no vow or practice left that has not been perfected for us. In the Gengi Bun, Shantao says therefore, 10 repetitions of the Buddha's name mentioned in the Meditation Sutra contain 10 vows and 10 practices. How? Namu means rely on. It also has the meaning of aspiring to birth and wishing to transfer the merit of the practices for attaining birth. Amida Butsu constitutes the practices required to accomplish birth. For this reason, whoever repeats the name will surely be born in the Pure Land. The fact that repetitions of the name made by the lower class of the lower grade of aspirants who are unable to think of Amida on their deathbed completely fulfill the vows and practices demonstrates that vows and practices are not to be undertaken by us human beings. The vows and practices needed to ensure birth in the Pure Land for us ordinary people have already been fulfilled by the Bodhisattva Dharmakara's vow, which took him 5 kalpas to establish, and his practices, which extended for innumerable kalpas. Realization that Amida has completed the vow and practices is called the 3 minds, or the threefold faith, or simply the faith. Namu Amida Butsu is the verbal reverberation of Amida Buddha's fulfillment of ordinary beings' vows and practices in the name. Therefore, the realization does not stay in our mind and heart. It returns to the original source, Buddha's vow. The name doesn't remain in us, but goes straight to the great vow. This means that putting Pure Land teaching into effect lies solely in understanding the 18th vow to the full. Shantao, too, says, in the Josen Gi, in the larger Sutara, the 48 vows are set out solely to make it clear that those beings who repeat the name exclusively are assured of birth in the Pure Land. Amida has perfected virtues as innumerable as the sand grains of the Ganges. For such as us, the ignorant, and those whose thoughts are uncontrolled, his Pure Land represents supreme delight, and so it is called the land of utmost bliss. It would be a great pity if anyone who believes in Amida's vow and says his name should take the name to be the virtuous name of a Buddha who resides outside of himself, and should think that, by virtue of his earnest repetition of the name, he will be born in the Pure Land. If only the firm belief arises in us that Namu Amida Butsu represents the accomplishment of our birth in the Pure Land, our birth there is confirmed at the instant we say it, because Amida Buddha himself, constitutes the practices required for our birth. When we hear the name, we should take it for our assurance of birth, and that it is one with his enlightenment. Even though we have doubts about Amida's having perfected his enlightenment, we should have no doubts at all about whether our own birth has been accomplished. If one single being were to remain unsaved, Amida would never have entered enlightenment. To realize that this is so is truly to understand the 18th vow. Here ends part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Part 2. Anjin Ketsujōshō. The firm establishment of peace of mind. In order to be born in the Pure Land, people should indeed make the necessary vow and carry out the practice themselves. However, Bodhisattva Dharmakara has made the vow and carried out the practice for us. The effect he has achieved is made available to us. This is beyond the law of cause and effect in the worldly, as well as the supramundane sense. Shantao praised Amida's vow as an extraordinary universal vow. Amida has fulfilled the vow and practice in place of all beings wishing to save, first of all, those sinking in the ocean of birth and death, and then to extend salvation to the virtuous. He resolved that, if a single sentient being escaped salvation, his compassionate vow would not be fulfilled. When he fulfilled the vow and practice for the sake of each and every sentient being, his enlightenment was accomplished, and the birth of ordinary people in the Pure Land was achieved. In the vow, Amida declared that he would not enter enlightenment if there was any point in space where his wonderful name was not heard. We do hear the name Amida, and so we should realize that our birth in the Pure Land has already been achieved. In this case, to hear does not mean listening to the name inattentively. It means harboring no doubts as we hear the wonderful working of other power in the original vow. In hearing the name, the power to hear it has been achieved by virtue of the original vow. It is entirely due to other power. Even if Amida has accomplished our birth in the Pure Land, how could we realize it without hearing the name, which has been revealed by the fulfillment of the vow? Suppose someone hears Amida's name and worships a representation of him, but does not realize that the name signifies his accomplishment of our birth in the Pure Land, and does not take the representation to be the embodiment of enlightenment. This enlightenment, the Bodhisattva Dharmakara attained by fulfilling the vow that he would not attain enlightenment unless all living beings were ferried to the Pure Land. Then, such a person neither truly hears the name, nor truly worships Amida. In the Byodo-gakkyo, it says, when they hear the Pure Land teaching, their rapture over it makes them dance and jump about, and their hair stands on end. This means that our joy in faith is not a usual one. If we were to apply ourselves to the practice necessary for transcending birth and death, we should surely find that we lacked both the Bodhi mind and the intelligence necessary for the undertaking. As we have neither the eye of wisdom nor the feet of practice, we are certainly destined to the pit of fire in the three evil realms. However, how happy we are to know that Amida has accomplished the necessary vow and practice in our stead, and thus, consummated, the enlightenment, in which those to be saved, and Amida himself, are one. When we think of this, we feel almost like dancing, and jumping for joy. This is equivalent to what is said in the larger sutara. Then one hears the teaching, and remembers Amida, with singleness of heart. And also, we praise the name, in rapture, as we hear it. When we do not take the name to be something external, but regard it as having accomplished our birth in the Pure Land, and when we worship Amida's representation as showing ourselves when we are so born, then we may say that we have truly heard the name and have worshipped Amida. To realize this is to believe in the original vow. Those who have firm faith in the Nembutsu Samadhi, Nembutsu Zamai, of necessity, find themselves one with Namu Amida Butsu in both mind and body. Our bodies are said to be composed of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. In Hinayana Buddhism, they are said to be made up of minute particles, gokumi. If we were to break up our bodies into those minute particles, we should not, at any time, come upon one single tiny fragment of a particle that was not imbued with the merit of the reward body Buddha, Hobusu. Thus, our bodies, being one with Amida, are in themselves Namu Amida Butsu. Our minds are full of wayward desires, and the petty impulses accompanying them. They rise and perish from moment to moment. If we were to analyze our minds into 100,000 aspects, there would not be one of them that was not permeated with Amida's vow and practice. Thus, our minds, being one with Amida, are in themselves Namu Amida Butsu. Amida's compassionate breast throngs with sentient beings who are constantly sinking. Therefore, those to be saved and Amida himself are one, and are united in Namu Amida Butsu. Again, the merit of the Dharma realm body Buddha, Hokkaigen, suffuses the depths of our deluded minds. For this reason, too, those to be saved and Amida himself are one, and are united in Namu Amida Butsu. It is the same regarding the principal and subordinate recompensed in the Pure Land. As for the subordinate recompense, there is not a single object, even down to a leaf of a gem tree, which has not been formed for the sake of us, the most depraved. Therefore, we find here, too, that those to be saved and that which belongs to Amida are one, and are united in Namu Amida Butsu. As for the principal recompense, there is not a single mark of Amida Buddha's physical distinction, from the white curl of hair between the eyebrows down to the sole, bearing the mark of a wheel of 1,000 spokes, which does not indicate the consummation of the vow and practice for the sake of us sentient beings who are constantly sinking. For this reason, we find here that those to be saved and Amida himself are one, and are united in Namu Amida Butsu. Our minds and bodies are three kinds of action: physical, verbal, and volitional, and our four bodily attitudes, moving, standing, sitting, and lying, are all interpenetrated by the merit of Amida, the reward body Buddha. Therefore Namu, the one who takes refuge in Amida, is never, even for an instant, separated from Amida Butsu. Amida himself. Every thought is holy. Namu Amida Butsu. Each breath, in and out, is never, even for a moment, separated from the Buddha's merit, and so, its substance is entirely Namu Amida Butsu. There was once a man named Vajrabodhi, who constantly practiced the water meditation. His body turned into a mass of water, pulled by the state of his mind. This illustrates the fact that, when one is totally dedicated to a certain method of practice, one's mind and body actually become it. When we have come to a true realization of the Nembutsu Samadhi, our bodies, as well as our minds, become Namu Amida Butsu. When this realization is verbally expressed, we say Namu Amida Butsu. This is the veritable Nembutsu of the universal vow. The Nembutsu does not refer merely to the oral act of reciting it, but, more properly, it expresses our faith that the virtue of Amida Buddha is already fulfilled in us, in the form of name, and has been ever since his enlightenment, 10 long eons ago. The verbal expression of this realization is Namu Amida Butsu. The quintessence of the heart of this Buddha, being great compassion, his primary concern is to emancipate, more than anybody else, ignorant and dull beings like us. For this purpose, he has declared that the accomplishment of his enlightenment is such that his name and he himself are one and the same. He reveals himself in his name, endowing it with all his merits and virtues. Therefore, even those of little faith, and those whose understanding is limited, can be born in the Pure Land, if they say Namu Amida Butsu. However, as we are ordinary, unenlightened beings of inferior capacity, we are not able to come by even a little faith. Yet when we hear the full implication of the name, until we have thoroughly understood it, faith will be awakened in us. Here ends part 2. Stay tuned for part 3. Understanding the significance of Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Part 3. Anjin Ketsujōshō. Why the Nembutsu is the verbal embodiment of faith. If there is someone who says Namu Amida Butsu, but fails to attain birth in the Pure Land, it is, according to Tan Luan, because his saying of the name does not conform to the import of the name. To conform to the import of the name means to say the name with a belief that we shall be born in the Pure Land by the virtue and power of Amida Buddha. Full understanding of the import of the 6-syllable name, Namu Amida Butsu, is called having the threefold faith. This is because the saying of the name is the verbal embodiment of faith. Therefore, the saying of Namu Amida Butsu, while being mindful that Amida's virtue is thoroughly consummated in me, constitutes the Nembutsu recitation with the threefold faith. Those who recite the Nembutsu with self-power keep Amida separate from themselves, and conceive of him as dwelling in the Western Pure Land. Being unenlightened, ordinary beings, such people only occasionally think of Amida's other power, and say the name, thereby holding themselves aloof from Amida. When a trace of Bodhi mind appears in them, they imagine Pure Land birth is within easy reach, but when they do not feel like reciting the Nembutsu, and the Bodhi mind fades, they feel quite uncertain about their birth in the Pure Land. The impulse to seek enlightenment rarely arises in the minds of ordinary people, and so, it is natural that they should remain in their unsettled plight regarding their birth in the Pure Land. They want their birth there confirmed, and wonder if, by chance, it will just happen. But the issue will never be certain until they die. Namu Amida Butsu is sometimes on their tongues, but they can hardly be assured of their birth in the Pure Land. We might say, it is like those people who visit somebody only when necessity arises, or, like those who attend court services. They wonder how they can do what Amida wishes, and they seek his favor by flattery in order to be born in his Pure Land. By so doing, they separate themselves from Amida. Their self-made faith, holding Amida's great compassion at a distance. In this condition, they are completely uncertain of their birth in the Pure Land. The Nembutsu meditation, Nembutsu Zamai, is the realization that the great compassionate enlightenment of Namu Amida Butsu, in which we, the saved, and Amida, the saving power, are united. Since it is Amida himself who has completed all our vows and practices, the putting of hands together in reverence, the saying of the Nembutsu with the mouth, the believing in Amida with the mind, everything is accomplished by other power. Hence, showing that in the Nembutsu meditation, the saved and the saving power are united. The Meditation Sutra says, in the section on the 8th meditation, all the Buddhas and Tathagatas have a Dharma realm body, and so, Amida Buddha enters the minds of all sentient beings. Shantao explains this passage as follows. The Dharma realm is the world which is to be enlightened, in other words, the world of sentient beings. He does not specifically say, sentient beings who practice meditation, or sentient beings who have Bodhi mind, but states that sentient beings of the Dharma realm are to be enlightened by Amida. Hence, it is said, the Dharma realm is the world which is to be enlightened. In other words, the world of sentient beings, he precisely explains. Since Amida's mind reaches there, his body also reaches there. The virtue of Amida's body and mind fills the minds and bodies of all beings. Hence, the Meditation Sutra says, Amida enters the minds of all sentient beings. He who believes this is called one who practices the Nembutsu. Again, in explaining the meditation on the true body, Shantao says that the threefold action of Nembutsu followers and Amida's action are not separate from each other. Since Amida's enlightenment is dependent upon the birth of all beings in the Pure Land, and the birth of all beings in the Pure Land is realized through Amida's enlightenment, their threefold action and Amida's are completely one and the same. Those who have learned and understood that there is no birth in the Pure Land for us sentient beings apart from Amida's enlightenment, and that our vow and practice have been accomplished for us by Amida himself, are called those who practice the Nembutsu. And the verbal expression of this faith of theirs is Namu Amida Butsu. And so, however hard the true Nembutsu follower may try to get away from Amida, he cannot separate himself from Amida by so much as the shadow of a thought. Because Amida has accomplished the enlightenment of Namu Amida Butsu, in which he and all beings are united. The ignorant, most inferior beings of the lowest grade, who say Namu Amida Butsu, even though they lack mindfulness, can be born in the Pure Land, not by virtue of their saying Namu Amida Butsu, but because they're saying it simply reveals their already achieved birth, the birth made, especially attainable, for the most wicked. Even those, who can hardly hear the name, the three treasures, after the destruction of the three treasures, mentioned in the larger sutra, will be born in the Pure Land, by just saying, Namu Amida Buddha once. In this case, it is not the saying of it that brings about their birth there, but the latent working of a vow and practice, consummated by Amida, that comes to the surface in them, with that single saying of Namu Amida Buddha, and thus, their birth in the Pure Land, the event of culminating importance in life, is assured. If we understand this, we see that our birth in the Pure Land, having been settled here and now, is not attributable to our own good sense in saying Namu Amida Buddha and having faith in other power. Our saying of Namu Amida Buddha reveals the consummation, for and in us, of the virtue which Amida achieved at the moment of enlightenment, 10 long eons ago, after having labored assiduously for an incalculably prolonged period of time. In our saying of Namu Amida Buddha, we are mindful of this fact, and in our performance of religious practices, we worship and revere Amida to express our joy and gratitude. Thus, Amida's perfect enlightenment and our performance of religious practices are one and inseparable. To call this a close relationship is not enough. Any proximity is too distant. We should know that within this oneness, we make a distinction between the one who thinks and that which is thought. Here ends Part 3. Stay tuned for Part 4. Accepting the great faith of the other power. Part 4. Anjin Ketsujōshō. How can we accept the great faith of the other power? In Vasubandhu's discourse on the Pure Land it says, the great congregation of sages, in the form of pure blossoms, surrounding the Buddha, are born there, having been transformed from within the flower of enlightenment. Those who have attained the great faith of the other power are called pure blossom sages, for they will all alike be born from within the flower of enlightenment. The flower of enlightenment corresponds to the spiritual lotus flower that grows from Amida's great compassion, by which he entered that enlightenment. Called the unity of rescued and rescuer, when all living beings in the universe had their vows and practices fulfilled by him. As Bodhisattva Dharmakara, Amida pledged the Pure Land birth of all of them, and vowed he would not enter enlightenment, unless they were all born there. The same thing is taught, in the 7th meditation section of the Meditation Sutra, as the way to be free of pain and suffering. It is also shown in the lowest birth of the lowest grade section, as lotus flowers that welcome those who have committed the 5 gravest offenses. The Buddha's mind is likened to a lotus flower, because it is never besmirched with the muddy defilements of ordinary beings' earthly desires and passions. How does the lotus flower birth of the Buddha's mind come about? In his explanation of this passage, Tan Luan says, they are all born by the same Nembutsu, and not by any other path. He also says, those who inhabit the world, even the remotest place, throughout the whole extent of time are all brothers and sisters. We differ morally, being separable into 9 grades, but we do not differ in respect of relying on Amida's vow and practice, and so, we are all united in enlightenment. Therefore, Dan Luant says, "They are all born by the same Nembutsu, and not by any other path." Those who have reached Pure Land birth before this, have gone there by relying on the vow and practice of other power, and those who will be so born, after this, will go there by taking refuge in the one thought of Amida's enlightenment. They all arrive within the lotus flower of Amida's mind and heart. For this reason, it is said, all the sentient beings in the whole world are brothers and sisters. Those who see the Buddha's body, also see with reverence the Buddha's mind and heart, which is none other than his compassion. With pity, Amida fixes his attention on us, so that his mind and heart penetrates as deep as the marrow of our bones and stays there. It is like a piece of charcoal that has caught fire. We cannot pluck the fire from the burning charcoal, however much we try. The embracing light of his mind and heart shines on us, right through to the core of our flesh and bones. Even though it is contaminated with the three poisons of greed, hatred and illusion, and with every other defiling passion and anxiety, there is no region of our heart that is not saturated with the Buddha's virtue. Thus, the Buddha and sentient beings are constitutionally one body, from the very beginning. This state of affairs is called Namu Amida Butsu. Once this faith is awakened, anyone who says the Nembutsu only once in a while, has to be called a person of constant Nembutsu. Shantou says the same thing, in his commentary on the Meditation Sutra, in the section on the three relationships with Amida. When sentient beings always say the Buddha's name, and always worship him with the body, when we trust in the virtue of Amida's threefold activity, bodily, oral and volitional, our own threefold activity is united with Amida's wisdom, and the virtues Amida has amassed, over many eons, are exhibited in our bodily, oral and volitional activities. Furthermore, in China during the Tang dynasty, there lived a much respected man called Fu, a great teacher who excelled in Mahayana, as well as in non-Buddhist scriptures. He used to say, "Every morning the Buddha and I rise together, and every night I sleep with the Buddha in my arms." When he said, the Buddha, he meant Tathagata, the noumenal Buddha, which is commonly discussed in the Holy Path teachings. However, from the viewpoint of the attainment of perfection by practices, exactly the same thing can also be said. Aspirants feel the same way, once they are protected by the embracing light of Amida's mind and heart. They rise each morning hand in hand with Amida's virtues and retire each night embracing his wisdom. How can we take advantage of the virtues of those Buddhas, mentioned in other sutras, who are not close to us? The noumenal virtues of Tathagata, the Dharma nature, lie close at hand. But we who have no wisdom and intelligence, cannot find a way to profit by them. It is a great pity that we vainly go back to our own ground, where we have to repeat the round of mortality, bound hand and foot by the unreasoned illusion of self-power, in spite of our having long been rescued by other power. Amida's vow and practice within us, that ensures our enlightenment, and our pure land birth without self-power. How sorry Shakyamuni Buddha would feel that his 8,000 comings and goings were to no avail, and how saddened Amida Buddha would be to find no trace of the effects of his long and earnest efforts to enlighten us, we who were so difficult to teach. Even if only one person comes to believe in this marvelous vow and practice, it is a real repayment of the Buddha's kindness. And so it says in Tao Chozan Rakushu, since there has already been established the way of other power, that we can make use of, we should stop thinking of staying in our burning house, and clinging foolishly to self-power. How true this is, in teaching that we should renounce the false claims of boastful self-power and instead trust in other power. Shantao explains. We should make sure that we leave this misleading path and return home. Also, he says, now I'll leave. I don't feel like staying in this treacherous, evil place. Furthermore, in his Hojuzan, Shantao says, the land of ultimate bliss, nirvana, the realm of non-action, is difficult to reach, for those who rely on miscellaneous good deeds, performed according to different circumstances. Therefore, the Buddha presents us with a choice of the essential way and teaches us to recite Amida's name single-mindedly. The meaning of this passage is this. The land of ultimate bliss is the place of non-action, asamskara, and non-defilement, anasrava. And so miscellaneous good deeds performed according to different circumstances would probably not qualify us to be born there. We should take refuge in the Nembutsu samadhi of non-action and non-defilement and, thereby, seek to be born in the recompensed land of non-action and eternal life. Firstly, miscellaneous good deeds, performed according to different circumstances, denotes self-power practices. One who lacks a right understanding of Buddhism or awakens no faith may claim, through one's acquaintance with a monk of the Ritsu sect, that the precepts are the most precious thing in the world, or think that the esoteric practices of Shingon, performed even for the purpose of praying for some secular benefit, will serve to establish close relations with Buddhism, and so they are valuable. Practices such as these are good deeds, performed according to our own convenience and circumstances. Therefore, they are relegated to the position of miscellaneous good deeds. On this level of practice, the same might be said about the Nembutsu practice, that is, reciting the Nembutsu by self-power, might be equivalent to miscellaneous deeds, performed according to the practitioner's circumstances. People arbitrarily take the Nembutsu as follows. When one meditates on the principal and subordinate adornments of the Pure Land, and recites the name, the Nembutsu does exist. But it does not exist when one does not meditate on or recite the name. The Nembutsu on this level of practice can scarcely be regarded as the Nembutsu of non-action and eternal life. If the Nembutsu exists only when we recite the name, and ceases to exist when we don't, then it is, after all, a Nembutsu of evanescence and vicissitude. The characters for non-action literally mean nothing to be done. Hinayana Buddhism speaks of three kinds of non-action. The non-action of space, which is one of the three, means that space neither passes away, nor is originated. It is naturally so. In Mahayana Buddhism, non-action is the everlasting, unchanging law, called suchness, dharma nature and so on. In the section explaining the title of the Genjabun, it is said, the dharma body is everlasting just like space. Here the author intends to indicate the everlasting quality of the Pure Land. Therefore, the land of ultimate bliss is called the land of non-action and eternal life, because it neither comes into being nor disappears by human agency. The Nembutsu Samadhi is the same as this. It does not appear or disappear according to whether or not sentient beings recite the Nembutsu. This should be considered carefully. Here ends Part 4. Stay tuned for Part 5. Single-mindedly thinking of Amida Buddha. Part 5. Anjin Ketsujōshō. Why by just thinking of Amida Buddha exclusively assures our birth in the Pure Land. Broadly speaking, Nembutsu means thinking of the Buddha. Thinking of the Buddha means thinking of the merit consummated by the Buddha's great Valkarma power to cut off the bonds which tie sentient beings to the condition of birth and death, and, thereby, enable them to be born in the recompensed land of non-retrogression. When we thus think of the Buddha's merit, write on the original vow, and take refuge in it, our threefold activity is raised to the level of the Buddha's enlightenment, by leaning on the Buddha's body. Therefore, the Nembutsu Samadhi under discussion is not our own practice, even though we recite, worship, and think. We should take it as performing Amida's practice. The original vow is the one which Amida produced after 5 kalpas of contemplation. Karma power means the bodhisattva practices he performed for millions of kalpas, and also the vast merit and virtue of Buddhahood, which has become manifest after his enlightenment 10 kalpas ago. Amida took great pains to cultivate this merit and virtue of vow and practice, solely for the sake of ignorant people of the future evil ages, like us. When he had severed the bonds of each and every one of the sentient beings of the 10 directions, which tied them to the condition of birth and death, and had thus fulfilled the vow and practice, thereby producing the recompensed land of non-retrogression, he consummated the enlightenment of the unity of the rescued and the rescuer. To think of the essence of enlightenment is called the Nembutsu Samadhi. Therefore the Nembutsu Samadhi should not reside in our threefold activity. In the normal course of practice, we are supposed to perform the practice ourselves, to cut off the bonds of birth and death, and carry out the vow and practice for entering the recompensed land. However, the special universal vow, being such that it transcends the law, that one attains a specific result by performing a specific causal practice, the Buddha has accomplished ordinary beings' birth in the Pure Land with his great vow, karma, power. If we take refuge in him with a feeling of gratitude for what he has done for us, our threefold activity works as a positive agent, that is, of writing the vow power, and Amida's vow power becomes an object of it, that is, a vehicle to take us to the recompensed land of the recompensed Buddha. Hence, it is said that when one's mind and heart of taking refuge rides on the original vow, all one's threefold activity leans on the Buddha's body. Amida's vow and practice form the very substance of the vow and practice required for our own birth in the Pure Land. Therefore, apart from the enlightenment Amida has attained, as the fruition of his vow and practice, we do not speak of any practice required for our own birth. However, though fully aware of this, some think that the Buddha's enlightenment is public property, and so, putting aside his enlightenment, they resolve, why not awaken Bodhi mind and perform practices with pure hearts? This is a deplorably attached view. Since Amida's enlightenment is the state in which our Pure Land birth has already been fulfilled, his body represents the vow and practice required for our birth. This practice is not the sort of practice which depends on some mindful act on our side. Therefore, it has been said, apart from the enlightenment Amida has attained, as the fruition of his vow and practice, we do not speak of any practice required for our own birth. To accept this enlightenment clearly in the mind is called the three minds, or Shinran. In this enlightenment, in which the unity of the rescued and the rescuer is accomplished, the name and the substance are not separate. To express this realization through the mouth is called Namu Amida Butsu. For this reason, Through faith, we are brought back to Amida's once and for all consummation of enlightenment. We are brought back to it through the recitation of the name with the lips. Even if we repeat the name 1,000 times, not a single recitation goes beyond the once and for all consummation of enlightenment. Even if we spend days and nights without saying the name, or without thinking of Amida, because of tiredness and indolence, so long as our faith in other power is founded on the original vow, we realize in our hearts that since the Buddha's body represents its eternal activity, it is the body of enduring and uninterrupted practice, the name being the practice of non-action and eternal presence. This is what Shantao means by Amida Butsu, is the practice. Further, when I said above, Nembutsu Samadhi is not our practice, even though we recite, worship and think, but we are performing Amida's practices. I mean that, if our minds that take refuge in Amida ride on the original vow, and all our acts of the mind, mouth, and body rest on Amida's body, our bodies cease to exist separately from Amida, and our minds cease to exist separately from him, too. When we recite the Nembutsu with the lips, we express our gratefulness for the enlightenment of the unity of the rescued and the rescuer. When we worship, we express with our bodies the overwhelming joy over the benevolence of other power. Therefore, even though we recite and think on Amida, we do not thereby intend to amass merit, but we simply perform the practice which Amida has already accomplished for us ordinary people. Amida's body is uncreated and undefiled. Both the principal and subordinate manifestations of the Pure Land are uncreated and undefiled. Since the name and Amida's body are not separate, the name is also uncreated and undefiled. Therefore, we should concentrate on the Nembutsu Samadhi by reciting Amida's name exclusively, and, again, exclusively, as quoted above. The word exclusively is repeated. The first exclusively means abandoning miscellaneous practices and taking up the right practices, and the second one means setting aside the auxiliary acts and being absorbed in the act of right assurance. Also, the first exclusively refers to the single practice, and the second one, the single faith. Thus, the single practice and single faith are implied by exclusively and, again, exclusively. The essence of the act of right assurance is not the Nembutsu recitation, as it is practiced by ordinary people as one of their three kinds of act. The body of the Buddha, who embraces and does not forsake those who recite the Nembutsu incessantly, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying, regardless of how long they have been practicing it, is indeed the act of right assurance for ordinary people's birth in the Pure Land. Because Amida's name and body are not separate, the name, too, is the act of right assurance. To be absorbed in the Namu Amida Butsu, in which the unity of the rescued and the rescuer is accomplished, is called the Nembutsu Samadhi. The name is uncreated and undefiled, because the unity of the rescued and the rescuer is accomplished in it, through the Buddha's unhindered wisdom, without awaiting the practitioner's recitation. This implication is shown as the land of ultimate bliss, the realm of non-action. The Nembutsu Samadhi is not based on the practitioner's concentrating thought. It is to remember that the Buddha's great compassion embraces all sentient beings. The Buddha's merit has been accomplished on sentient beings, affecting the unity of the rescued and the rescuer. Therefore, when the thought of taking refuge in Amida arises in our hearts, it does not, in fact, arise in our hearts for the first time. It is the merit which has been accomplished, for both the rescued and the rescuer, manifesting in our thought. As regards the recitation of Namu Amida Butsu, 2. We do not approach the Buddha by reciting it. The merit of the enlightenment, in which the unity of the rescued and the rescuer has been accomplished, manifests itself on our lips. We are brought back into the Buddha's body through faith. We are brought back into the Buddha's body through reciting the name. There is a parable of the sun, to distinguish other power from self-power. To seek birth in the Pure Land with self-power is like trying to see things in the dark with our own eyes. This is clearly an impossibility. Our eyes catch the sunlight and see the objects which are reflected in it. This is due to the power of the sun. However, even if there is sunlight, which is the cause of the act of seeing, those who were born blind cannot see objects. Again, even if our eyes, which act as a condition for seeing things, are not blind, we cannot see objects in the dark. Only when the cause, which is the sun, and the condition, which is the eyes, are united, does the act of seeing become possible. In the same way, our Pure Land birth, which is a matter of the greatest importance, comes about when we receive the merit of the original vow, with the thought of taking refuge in Amida. The mind and heart of taking refuge in Amida is like the eyes, and the embracing light of Amida's compassion is like the sun. Namu is to take refuge, and is like the eyes. Amida Butsu, the enlightenment body, in which the universal vow of other power is accomplished, is like the sun. Therefore, as far as receiving the merit of the original vow goes, when those who have a stock of merit from previous lives take refuge, Namu, in Amida, and say Amida Butsu, all the merit of thousands of practices and good acts, as numerous as the sand grains of the river Ganges, are fulfilled in them at the first utterance of that six-character name, Namu Amida Butsu. For this reason, we should not seek any other merit of goodness. Here ends Part 5. Stay tuned for Part 6. What are the four modes of birth in the Pure Land? Part 6. Anjin Ketsujōshō. On the firm establishment of peace of mind. What are the four modes of birth in the Pure Land? There are four modes of birth in the Pure Land. 1. Birth with right mindfulness. This is what is referred to in the Amida Sutta as one instantaneously attains birth while dwelling in an unperverted state of mind. 2. Birth in a frantic state of mind. It is stated in the Meditation Sutra section on the lower grade of birth. He who has done 10 evil acts, or broken precepts, or committed 5 deadly sins, will be in a frantic state of mind at the time of death, grasping at the air, perspiring white sweat, and seeing the fierce fire of hell manifesting before his eyes. If, however, he meets a good teacher, and is led to say, even one Nembutsu, think of Amida even once, or recite even 10 Nembutsu, he will be born in the Pure Land. 3. Birth with a dim consciousness. This is mentioned in the Gunji-ran. Even though, ordinarily, a person is shone upon by the all-embracing light, and, thereby, the faith of complete trust has been awakened in him. Since he still has a body of birth and death, his consciousness may become dim at the time of death, owing to some karmic causes in the past. Even if it does, there is no doubt that his birth in the Pure Land will be brought about by the other power wisdom of the Buddha. It is just as the moonlight ceaselessly shines upon us, even when we are sleeping. Since the all-embracing light continuously shines upon us, even if we lapse into a dim state of consciousness, we shall still attain birth, in the Pure Land, by the power of the light. Those who are ignorant of the law of causality, will question, why doesn't the Buddha, with his power, keep aspirants from lapsing into a dim state of consciousness? Or, in a dim state of consciousness, one will not attain birth. They have these doubts, because they are not well versed in the Holy Scriptures, and are confused about the law of causality, and, thus, entertain doubts about the Buddha's inconceivable wisdom. 4. Birth with a mere thought of the Buddha. This is mentioned in the Hakukyo. It is stated in it, that one will attain birth, even if one does not say the Nembutsu, but only thinks of the Buddha, in one's mind. The 4 modes of birth, were distinguished, by the Shonin of Kurodani. Ordinary people of the world, being unclear about the 4 modes of birth, think that if one does not say the Nembutsu, or lapses into a dim state of consciousness, at the time of death, one will not be born, but that if one says the name, one's birth is certain. This may sound reasonable, but it is a thoughtless view. It is stated, in the Shugoku Kaikyo, that 500 sons of a rich merchant recited the Buddha's name at their death, but failed to attain birth. Thus, those who recite the name, but lack a trusting faith, will be reborn in the human, or heavenly realm, not in the Pure Land. All the 4 kinds of aspirants attain birth, if a trusting faith has been awakened in them. In Vasubandhu's discourse on the birth, it is said, I take refuge in the Tathagata of light, unhindered throughout the 10 quarters. A profound teaching may be understood through a simple parable. Let us suppose that the sun is Kannon. Kannon's light is perceived, even by a little child. When very young, he does not know it. When he gets some wisdom, he will suppose that he sees things with his own power, that is, with his eyesight. However, when told by someone who really knows about the sun, that if one were able to see things with one's eyesight alone, one could see things at night, and then urge to go back to the primary cause, that is, the sunlight. He follows this instruction, and becomes convinced of the working of the sunlight. Similarly, the belief in one's eyesight will be replaced by the belief in Kannon's light. This is also the case when we have a trusting faith in Amida. Our life is Amida's life, even while we are unaware of it. We do not know this while our wisdom is not yet developed. When we get some wisdom and learn to depend on our own power, we think that this is our life. Then, hearing a good teacher's instruction that we should go back to Amida's life, which is the root of our life, we accept it, and take refuge in the Buddha of immeasurable life, with a belief that our life is the immeasurable life. Taking refuge in him, in this way, is explained as having right mindfulness. One who has submitted oneself to Amida, and thus attained right mindfulness, will be born, even if one afterwards loses consciousness, owing to some heavy karmic bonds. It is explained in the Gunjiran that one will attain birth, even in a dim state of consciousness, because, when shown upon by the all-embracing light, being in a dim state of consciousness will cease, and one will attain birth, with a heart of great joy. Again, before they submit themselves to Amida, the 3 lowest classes of person mentioned in the Meditation Sutra, see, at the time of death, manifestations of hell, and become frantic with fear. However, if led by a good teacher, to submit themselves to Amida, they will attain birth. Further, those who have submitted themselves to Amida, at ordinary times, receive the benefit of being embraced. Hence, when they die, they will attain birth while dwelling in unperverted thought. This is called birth with right mindfulness. Again, according to the Hakukyō, when the faith of submitting oneself to Amida is awakened, one will be born, even if one dies, without expressing one's faith in words, that is, saying the Nembutsu. This is called birth with the mere thought of the Buddha. Whatever the case may be, when the inconceivable other power faith is firmly established, there should not be any doubt about birth in the Pure Land. There is a parable in the Kemptsuzamai-kyo which says that once there lived a rich merchant who had a daughter. When he disposed of his wealth before death, he gave her a lump of gold obtained from Jambu River. She wrapped it in a filthy cloth and hid it in the mud. The king sent his retainers to take it, but, unable to find it, even though they walked on it, they returned home. Later, the daughter recovered it, and engaged in business with it, and then became even richer than her father. This is what the parable means. The king is one's mind king. The treasures are various good acts. Retainers are the 6 bandits. Being robbed of various goods by the 6 bandits means that one has no chance of attaining emancipation. To recover the gold from the mud, and become so rich that there was nothing she could not do with her wealth, means that when one attains firm faith through the Nembutsu Samadhi, one very quickly attains birth in the land of peace and bliss. To wrap the gold in a filthy cloth and hide it in the mud means that ordinary people who are defiled and evil in the period of the 5 defilements are the primary object of salvation. Again, when fire is brought to a piece of firewood, the fire does not leave it until it is burned out. The firewood is the practitioner's heart. The fire is Amida's light which embraces and does not forsake. When one is illumined and protected by Amida's spiritual light, one will see that the Buddha's mind is not separate from one's own, and that one's mind is not separate from the Buddha's. This state of unity is called Namu Amida Butsu. Here concludes our listening of Anjin Ketsujōshō. Firmly establishing the marvelous peace of mind that comes with our entrusting faith, Shinran, in Amida Buddha's primal vow, we know that our birth in the land of peace and bliss is absolutely guaranteed. May all our Dharma friends, who have read along with us, benefited from listening to this wonderful tract and entrust themselves single-heartedly to Amida's primal vow. The Buddha's infinite merits and virtues are bestowed equally to all beings. May all accept Amida's gift of Shinran and obtain birth in his land of peace and bliss.